All right, we're going to build a dashboard using the new shadcn sidebar component in NextJs 15. So a lot of good things happening. We have NextJs 15. We're going to implement shadcn in it, and then we're going to use the new sidebar component to build a template that you can use as the starting point of your project. So we have regular layout where you have the header and the footer down here for your regular pages. And then we're going to have this dashboard, which has a different layout using the sidebar component from shadcn, has this cool menu items on the side, and it's collapsible. You can collapse it to icons. We have this backlink that goes back to the template. And we're going to build this from scratch, going through the documentation for shadcn and talking about interesting features, theming and styling, and all the options and components that comes with the sidebar that allows you to build this component or this dashboard, really. So let's dive right in here. Let me just stop the dev server. I'm going to back out of this. And we're going to start by creating a brand new Next.js app. If you're curious about Next.js 15 and what has changed inside Next.js 15, there's a video. I will link it in the description where I talk about the new APIs, the breaking changes that you need to be aware of. There's also another video on the channel where I talk about implementing shadcn in Next.js 15 and what you need to be aware of there, because Next.js 15 is using React 19. It is still using the release candidate, but it is React 19. And shadcn components oftentimes have peer dependencies under the hood. And some of those, at the time that I'm recording, only one doesn't actually support yet React 19. So you have to pass a flag if you're using NPM. If you're using PNPM, you can just do how you do it normally, and it will work out of the box. But watch that video as well. I'm going to link that in the description too. So let's create our application. PNPM create next-app at latest. Let's call this next 15 shadcn. Tailwind, ESLint, no source directory, app router. When you're installing Next.js 15, it is going to ask you whether or not you want to run TurboPack in local dev. Again, more explanation in that video that I mentioned. And if you already know how to set up Next.js, there's timestamps down in the show notes. You can just skip to the part that we talk about dashboard if this is already repetitive for you here. So this is going to install our Next.js application. I have the version that I was running before behind this if I needed to cheat at any point, so you don't have to watch me code all of it. If we needed to, we will try to make as much as we can here by hand, and I'm going to show you extra features or extra functionality that you can add to your code. Okay, so let's come here and let's start by bringing this prettier RC, which is going to make our formatting nicer. So dot prettier RC, and let's copy that. This depends on two packages, so let's go pnpm add, and then the prettier package itself as well. Let's install these two. Let's not run the dev server, or let's run the dev server while we're here. So as you can see, it runs pretty fast because I'm running TurboPack, and that's the addition to Next.js 15. It's a Rust-based build tool. It makes your Next.js app or local development much faster. So definitely give it a try. So this is like a brand new Next.js app over here. So let's go to documentation for shadcn and start installing shadcn in our app. If you are using Next.js 15 as we do, there is this guide, which I talked about in the video that's in the cart. But basically, because we're using PNPM, you can just run the init command as you would do without any problems. So let me just stop the dev server here. So pnpm dlx shadcn at latest init is going to initialize our project for shadcn, and -d is just going to have the default answers to the questions that shadcn, the CLI tool, actually asks you. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually add dlx shadcn at latest, add button, just so we see this in action. So now I have the components JSON installed here, and also inside inside of my components, there's a UI folder and the button. This is the shadcn button that we can use inside of our application. Okay. So before going any further, what I'd like to do here is to have a providers component that we can share our theming. So we're going to have light and dark theme. So we're going to implement that really quickly here. So inside of a component, I'm going to add the providers component.tsx. And here I'm going to copy the code from here. I have shown implementing theming in NextJs before. So basically from a high level, we're using the Next Themes package. This is going to wrap our entire application with a theme provider that sets a class component on our HTML tag, which we can then use in Tailwind CSS to toggle our classes and make a light and dark theme. Now, this provider's pattern is a pattern that you would use in NextJS to wrap your entire app with a client component that allows you to then share React context, which is this theme provider here. Common question. This does not turn our entire app to a client component. You can still pass server components as props and a specific prop children without affecting the server client boundary. Okay, so let's go ahead and install this Next Themes package. So pm add Next Themes. We also have the Sonar, which is for toast notification. I'm adding the provider over here, so we can show toast notifications inside of our app anytime that we need it. So pm dlx shadcn at latest add Sonar. Okay, that should be done over here. Now, the way that we usually do this is inside of our layout. Now, what I want to do is to bring in this providers component, and we're going to wrap our children with this. We're going to have to pass in some options to our HTML tag to suppress the hydration mismatch warning, because the HTML tag coming from the server has no idea of the theme that the user prefers on the client side. So we have to suppress that hydration warning on the HTML tag. Let me see if I have anything else over here. We're going to stay with the default font that we have. The only thing that I have added here, which I would like to add, is this way of adding our fonts. So inside of our class name, there you have it. So this cn is going to, it's a function that you get when you install your shadcn. This is just to merge Tailwind classes. So that's what we're doing there. I close this off, save that. Okay. So I'm just making the body flex because I want the header and the footer to just stretch all the way. And that's about it. Okay. So with this now, we can then come in and have different route groups inside of our application. So the first one is going to be site. And then I'm going to create another one, dashboard. Now, route groups are to organize your code or an easy way for you to share layouts. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a dashboard which has a different layout and a site which is our site. So I'm going to move the home page to this site, right? So inside of root layout, we're just wrapping it with the providers, but inside of the site, maybe I can have another layout here. And this is going to then be a layout. So I'm going to call this site layout. This is going to, this is going to receive children. And let's say here, what I want to do is that I want to render a header component. And maybe I have a main tag with the children. And then I want to have a footer component. So this is our regular layout for all the marketing pages or the website. The dashboard, we're going to have a different layout. There's not going to be that regular header and footer. It's going to be our sidebar component. So let's go ahead and create this header and footer. I have it again here. So I apologize for having to copy this here, but these are basic components and I assume you already know how to create them. Header.tx. So let's bring in our logo too. So it's the Next15 logo that I created. Let's just bring it inside of the components, logo.tsx. All right, so here we have, let's go to the header and see what we're missing here. We have the theme toggle. So we have to create that. Sheet is your sheet off canvas sheet from shadcn. This is for mobile version of our app. We're going to show a menu icon and then we're going to render our links inside of a sheet instead of having to have the header up top. And also the logo here, let's just make this components logo. So theme toggle, let's just bring in the theme toggle too. This is a component that renders a button and uses the hooks from Next themes to toggle the theme. So basically, interesting. All right, so what we're doing here is we're getting a use theme hook from the Next themes. We're using the resolve theme and the set theme to then toggle the theme, show different icons. Usually this is installed. Let's see if we can get those from Lucid instead. Now let's bring in the header. I'm going to have to do the same thing for footer as well. I know this is boring and probably not why you clicked on this video, so bear with me, or just click on the timestamp below where I talk about the dashboard, but I want to end up with a nice template that we can use for all of our future Next.js applications. So let's refresh this and see what's happening. I probably need to install some dependencies. We brought in the theme toggle, so let's reload this. And we need to get the sheet. So let's go pm dlx shadcn at latest, add sheet. All right, pm dev. Let's see what's going on here. All right. So we need to add some stuff over here. Let's go to the home page first of all. Delete everything and have homepage just saying section .py I don't know, 40 div.container, and let's say text 3XL, font bold, and say home page. All right, now we need to add this container class to Tailwind. So themes, here we can say, we can say container and center true. This is just a class that allows us to center divs. And padding, I'm going to have a default version to be 2 rem. All right, so now if I go back to my page, yeah, everything is now centered. I need to just go back to our layout inside of our site, and we need to pass in a class of grow here. All right, so we have the header up top. We have the home page and the footer down here, if you can see, all set up, nice and dandy. If we go to the dashboard, there's nothing there yet. We're going to build these pages, but our theme works. And this is the first step on building our template. All right. So now we want to just work inside of this dashboard. So let's go to shadcn and actually follow along with shadcn sidebar component. So this is to build customizable, themable, composable sidebar components. Basically, you can add a lot of things to it. And it ties very nicely into other different shadcn components. Right now, you can see like there's drop-down menus already built into this, or the collapsible menu items. So it ties nicely into other shadcn components. So we need to add the sidebar. So let's go pm add sidebar. Let's override the button. Cheat, sure, yeah. All right. This is going to install this CSS variables inside of your global CSS. If it doesn't, you can just copy paste them. So let's check to see if there are. These are sidebar specific CSS variables, and they are separated by purpose so you can have a different theme inside of your dashboard from the regular site or from the main site. You can have the same, but if you want to have different, this is going to help you with that. Let me make this a bit bigger. So this is the anatomy of a sidebar component. So you have the sidebar component, you have a header and a footer down there, a scrollable area, which is called sidebar content. And then inside of it, you can put different sections, which are called sidebar groups. Okay. So this is what we need to do. Now, all of this is living inside of a sidebar provider, which is a context provider, actually sharing the context of whether or not this sidebar is collapsed or closed or open, shrink to icons or not, is it inside the mobile and whatnot. So this exposes some functionalities and functions for you to work with the state of your sidebar. Then you have the actual sidebar that you're going to work with, and then the main content is what comes in the main content on the right hand side of the actual dashboard. So that's the content. And then you have this sidebar trigger, which is like a button that opens and closes your sidebar. So at the very basic, you can just have a sidebar, a header, a content, a bunch of groups inside of it, and the footer, and then close this sidebar. So this is the kind of hierarchy of the components inside of your actual sidebar. So let's go ahead and build a sidebar, or build our first sidebar here. So we're going to create a layout which is for our dashboard pages. And since we have already created this route group over here, which is going to allow us to share the dashboard specific layout separate or different from our site layout. So I'm going to create a layout here dot tsx, and I'm going to call this dashboard layout. Then we have to create our sidebar. So we're going to create a new sidebar component, and as at the very basic, we can just put this inside of it. So I'm going to call this component dashboard sidebar dot tsx. Let's rename this to dashboard sidebar, and let's also rename these two to dashboard sidebar, because it's not in our example, it's not the app sidebar, it's just a dashboard sidebar, but the naming doesn't really matter. So dashboard sidebar. All right, so we have the layout. Inside of the layout, we are wrapping our components with the sidebar provider. We have the actual sidebar and the main content, which is the right-hand side content that shows up on the right of your sidebar. All right. Inside of our main content, we have the children. These are going to be any page that we put inside of this route group, and then a trigger that opens and closes the sidebar component, as you saw in the example in the beginning. So for example, if I have a page now in here that, let's say it says profile, right? It needs to be a folder. Apologies. So dashboard, a folder called profile, and a page.tsx inside of it. Let's say if I can spell profile page. So section, let's just leave it as an empty section now. H1 text 3 XL font bold profile page. All right, so now this profile page, because it is already inside of this dashboard, is going to share this layout automatically. Let's create another page just for the sake of this example. So let's say if we have settings, and then inside of it I can have a page.tsx. This is going to also share this same layout. So I'm going to change this to say settings page and then settings page. All right, so we've done these two. Let's just check our app and see what's going on here. Now this dashboard link is going to the reports. I don't have reports, but I do have profile. Let's see what shows up here now. Nothing. All right, so I didn't save this. Let's just refresh. All right, so dashboard is not, my bad. That's actually a very good point here. So when you put route groups, they do not actually affect the path. So this doesn't show up inside of the path. It's just a folder for organization purposes or for sharing and opting pages into a specific layout. So here we should not have the dashboard in the path. It's just /profile. Okay. If you wanted to have the dashboard as well, so everything, the profile, the settings, the admin, or whatever you want to add it to be inside of a dashboard, what you can do is to add a dashboard, just a regular folder here, and put everything else inside of this. So in fact, if I just move this there, settings there as well. Did I do it correctly? No. All right, so I have the profile and setting now living inside of the dashboard. Now if I just add the dashboard here, now you can see here we have the profile and we have the settings. There are different ways that you can really define this different structure inside of your app. I like using route groups to organize and to group different routes, sharing the same layout. Whether or not you want to put the profile pages inside of an actual dashboard path inside of the URL, it's your preference. I'm going to leave it as is. You can also have them living at the index, but it's good to know that the route groups don't actually affect the URL, so the site, the word site doesn't actually appear inside of the URL either. All right, so going back here, so we created these two components, and now we want to create some menu items inside of our sidebar, because as you see, there's nothing in the sidebar. We do have the sidebar here, but there's nothing inside of it. So how do we create that? Well, we can just create them with something called, or a component called sidebar menu. So we're going to go to our component and to our dashboard sidebar. We're going to replace this with dashboard sidebar. This is straight out from the documentation. So what it does is that, let me just show it inside of the code. So we're defining some items, some menu items here, home, inbox, calendar, whatnot. We're going to update this in a second. But we have the same sidebar component, the same sidebar content. Inside of it, there is a group. This is how you would section different groups of content or menu items inside of your sidebar. And our group has a label, and there is the sidebar group content. Inside of it, we are putting a sidebar menu for every item that we have in this array. We're going to render a menu item and a button. We are setting the as child to use a link. We can use the next link over here. Item icon. Every item inside of our items array has already an icon associated with it and a span. Now, this is a good pattern to learn how to create menu items inside of your sidebar. They're going to show up as buttons, menu items and menu button. You can add action buttons to them, and there's different things you can do with them. If you go through the documentation, you can see all the different props and components that are associated with menu items. But from a high level, this menu item, you're going to use this menu item and the menu button a lot if you're adding items to your sidebar. And here I'm just creating links to go different pages. And if you wanted to enable your sidebar to collapse to the icons, now you see it doesn't show anything when I collapse it now. But if you want to collapse it to icons, I'm going to show you how you would do it. But you have to remember to put your label inside of a span in your button. So we have the icon separate and the title or the label separate inside of a span. This is going to allow shadcn to just drop to the icon when you actually enable that feature, which we're going to see in a second. So when I come here, you can see I already have some items over here, which is basically what we defined here. So let's go ahead and actually write the stuff that we have. So we have the profile that lives on dashboard profile. Let's just leave the icons the same. I don't want to bore you with that. And we have the settings and dashboard settings. Okay, so these are the links that we have. So profile and settings. So if I go to profile, that's the profile page. Settings goes to settings page. All right, so we can give some padding to our pages just so they look nicer. So dashboard, let's say to profile page. Let's just give some padding here. I don't know, maybe 4. All right, so let's go to settings and just give a padding here as well. So profile and then settings. This is the trigger button that already works, opens and closes our sidebar. And as easy as that, you created a sidebar component, a dashboard with collapsible menu items. Now, there are different components here and different props that you can pass. I'm going to explain some of them here, but obviously the documentation would be the resource to go if you wanted to learn more or if I missed something here. So we have the sidebar provider, as I mentioned. Now you can control this sidebar with the open and unopen change, state and state updater function, and a default open. You can define the size of it depending on whether or not you're on a mobile device, all of which are inside of this sidebar component. So once we ran the CLI command for shadcn to install sidebar, it is going to dump this sidebar component here, which is a humongous actually file containing all of the components that you need to use for your sidebar. Now, up top of it, there are some variables, CSS variables, or in this case, just variables set here that controls, let's say, the width of your sidebar or different things here. So you can look into this file and you can customize it as much as you want to build your own dashboard. This is just a pattern or the components that you would need to compose together to build your sidebar. So we have the provider. You can set different widths on it using CSS variables. Your sidebar also works with shortcuts. So if I hit Command B or Control B on Windows, it just opens and closes. What letter actually or what key in the keyboard does that is B. This is also in this sidebar. So you can change this to decide which button actually does that. Is the code small here? So I'll make it big, a bit bigger. Now, if you wanted to persist the state, so if I'm closing this and refreshing the page, it opens back up again. So if I wanted to persist this state, I'm going to use cookies in NextJS to do that, and that's the next step. So we can use cookies to store the default state. So let's go back inside of our layout. So dashboard layout. And then here we're going to use cookies. So let's import this. Now cookies in NextJs 15 is an asynchronous function that you need to await. And you can now pass in this default open to default open. Again, there's a video on the channel where I talk about NextJs 15, the APIs and breaking changes. So if you're not familiar with that, you could just check that out. But basically, all of our dynamic functions like cookies, headers, and APIs are now asynchronous. That's a way towards using partial pre-rendering in future, using async await or really suspense to mark what parts of your application is going to be dynamic. And that's the way NextJS is going to define. That's why they have changed cookies to now be an asynchronous function. So you need to await it. If you're in NextJS 14, you don't need to have await. But if you're in NextJS 15, you have to await this. Now with this set, if I now close this and refresh, it's going to stay closed because it is reading the cookies and passing this default open to my sidebar provider, which is a context provider, actually deciding or sharing the state of the sidebar with the rest of the application. You can change the cookie name. By default, it's sidebar state. You could change it to what you want. Now, the main component we mentioned is sidebar, and there is three interesting props on it. Side, first of all, you can decide it's showing on the left-hand side or right-hand side. You can decide the styling of it, whether it's a floating kind of sidebar or it's an inset, which makes your main content an inset. We're going to see this in action. And whether or not it's collapsible. And if it is collapsible, is it collapsing off canvas or is it collapsing to the icons? So let's actually set this. I'm going to start with the collapsible. So let's go to our dashboard sidebar. This is where we're rendering the sidebar component, and I'm going to say collapsible, and I'm going to pass an icon to this. So if I go back and now I collapse, it automatically collapses to the icons because, again, we are using this menu button with a separate icon and a span for the title. That's what shadcn detects to just drop back to the icons. Isn't that great? So here we have this label. Maybe we can call this label dashboard for this group. You can have multiple groups inside of your sidebar over here. So that's the first thing. So you have, by default, it's off canvas, so it just goes off screen. It can be icon or it can be none, which means it's not even collapsible. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing you can do is to pass in a variant. And what I love about this is the inset. And let me show you how this looks. So if you just do the inset, you see it doesn't look right because you need to do something else as well. So if you're using the inset, you have to then use this sidebar inset and wrap your main content with this sidebar inset component. So we're going to come back to where the layout is and where I'm wrapping my main content, and I'm going to have this sidebar inset, and I'm going to wrap my main content with this when I'm using the inset variant. Now if I go back, you can see this is inside of an inset. Now this main content is now inset. There's a little border around or a little gap around the screen. And I like this setting over here. Now what we can do here inside of our main content maybe is to give a padding 4 to this guy as well, so it's not really tight there, but you get the idea. You can just basically you have this sidebar component and your main area here, so you can just design it however you want. This is the version that I really like. So collapsible we've already tried with the icon option, just going to that. Now your provider component also has this use sidebar hook that gives you the state and the functions you need to toggle the state of your sidebar. So for example, if you wanted to create a custom toggle button instead of this, a trigger, you can just use sidebar hook. It needs to be called inside of the provider, obviously, and then get the toggle sidebar and then use this function to toggle the sidebar, whether you're on a mobile or on a desktop. Now, the other component is the sidebar header. So we have the sidebar header and the footer sticky components on the top and bottom of your sidebar. Maybe we can use that header to put a link to go back to the website, to our original site here, right? So we have the sidebar content over here. So what I can do is to have a sidebar header. Inside of it, we're going to have a sidebar menu. And then we're going to have a sidebar menu item. And inside of it, we can have a sidebar menu button as child. Sure. We're going to link to our homepage and maybe just say logo here, if that makes sense. We're going to see how that looks in a second. And that should be it. Header. All right, so let's see how this looks. So we have that header component there now added. And because I have rendered, well, we don't have report, we're going to have to update that as well. So you can have your logo there, or let me just borrow what I have over here. So let's go to dashboard and get this button with the arrow component. So I'm going to replace this and then get the arrow left from Lucid React, which is going to be a back to the site link. But because, again, I have wrapped my title inside of a span with an icon inside of it, when I collapse this to icons, the icon actually stays up there really nicely. So you can do whatever you want, but this is a pattern that I mentioned. So adding menu items, and a button inside. This by default renders a button. You can pass the as child prop. This is a shadcn pattern where you would just then pass in whatever component you need as child. In this case, a link tag from Next to just go to the home page with an icon and a label, which ties really nicely to the way that this collapsible menu is working here. So that was the header component. The footer is very similar. We're not going to implement the footer. The sidebar content is the main scrollable area where we are actually defining different groups or different sections. Inside of each group, you can have group labels, actions, and also menu items. You can also make each of these groups a collapsible sidebar component. And as I mentioned, this component ties into other shadcn components. So you just wrap your group with a collapsible component from shadcn, and that's another component from shadcn if you haven't seen already. So collapsible is another component that allows you to have this type of components. Now all you need to do here is to put your sidebar group inside of a collapsible with a trigger and a collapsible content, and then your menu items will become collapsible like so. You can add actions to the label, so it just shows in front of the group label if you want. Sidebar menu is the same way that we added these menu items. We've seen this sidebar menu, menu items, menu button. As I mentioned, they by default show a button. You can just pass in as child and a link tag to it. Now the sidebar menu also takes in is active to show an active button. So if I go back here and inside of this to this button, if I pass in is active and go back, you can see both buttons are active. You can have a custom component that wraps this, that is going to actually make it active if we are actually on the path that belongs to this specific button. So how would we want to do this? So we can create maybe another component. We can call this sidebar menu active button .tsx. So sidebar menu active button. So this is going to render this menu button. Let's say if we want to use it for the links and we want to see if the href that we're passing into the link is the same as the href or the URL that we are currently on. We want to show that item as an active so we know what page we are on. So basically we're going to render this inside of our sidebar menu. So let's get this button. We can also get this link, and we need to pass in some props here. So we need an href, we need an icon, and we need a title. Okay. So this is going to be href, and this is going to just render the icon. Not really. Let me see how I did it here. Components, do I have it here? No, so bear with me for a second. Okay, so it's a React node that we're passing in here. It's not an element, it's a React node. All right, so, and then the title will be here. And what we want to do here is to get the path name, and we're going to have use path name from next navigation, and we need to mark this as a client component because we're using hooks. And isActive is then whether or not the path name is equal to the href we're passing into this, and we're going to say isActive equals to isActive. Okay, so let's make this a bit nicer, and this is @components. All right, so going back here now, instead of that, if I render the sidebar menu active button, I need to pass in an href, which is item.url, and icon, and the title, right? Now you can see I'm on the profile page, and it shows profile as an active state. If I click to settings, now settings become an active button, which is a cool pattern to kind of wrap shadcn components with the functionality that you need. For example, we need the client component to use the path name here to decide whether or not this button is active, to just render it in a different style. So let's change this header component before I click on it one more time. So header, this needs to go to dashboard profile page. All right. So sidebar menu action, again, these are the actions that you can pass in. You can have drop-down menus. This is going to be a button separate from the menu button that you can pass in, a drop-down menu as an example here. You can also have subcategories or sub-menu items inside of menu items. So there's this sidebar sub-component and menu item and button that you can just use to render submenus. You can also make them collapsible, so they collapse. The top one is a menu item. Inside of it, there's more menu. You can go through the docs to implement this, depending on your use case. You can also have badge in front of any menu item. You can have skeletons. If you're rendering this menu items, let's say you're fetching this as, I don't know, projects from your database, and you need to render a loading UI while this is actually fetching. You can use that skeleton there. The sidebar separator is between different sections, headers and components. You can have separators. The trigger, as I mentioned, is the button that opens and closes or collapses a sidebar. Custom trigger, you can use the use sidebar hook to get the toggle sidebar function and then wrap it inside of any button to create your own custom trigger. There's also this sidebar rail where you can just add it to your sidebar component. Let me show you how it works. I don't really like it, but let me show you how it works. So if you go to your app dashboard, oh, it's inside of the, let's just start from here and then go to that. So inside of this sidebar component, we have the header, we have the content, right? So we can add this sidebar rail, which is going to create a rail. So here, let me show you. You see when I hover over this section of my page, now this shows up. This actually also acts as a trigger. So instead of clicking on the trigger, you can just click on this. I don't really like it because when I hover over it, it just shows this border. And when I'm having this inset way of showing the sidebar, it doesn't quite go well. So a matter of preference, really, but you can add it to your app if you wanted to. I'm just going to, sorry, I'm just going to, what did I do? All right. So back to normal. Data fetching, as I mentioned, you can fetch this items from React Server Component if you want, render a skeleton. If you're using Server Component, you can use Suspense to wrap that, like so. If you're using client-side data fetching, like with React Query or SWR, you can show the skeleton inside of your loading state and the regular menus. If you're fetching the actual menu items from your database, you can, it comes with that skeleton that you can use to kind of show a loading UI. To control the sidebar, I mentioned the open and on open change that you can pass into your sidebar provider. To control this internally manages its own state, but if you want to control it from outside, you can just pass in open and on open change to state setter functions and control it from outside of your sidebar. For theming, we mentioned that there are specific CSS variables added for the sidebar that is going to help you style this separate from the rest of your app if you want. And the other thing that I want to mention here is this styling. So there's a few examples here that I'm going to mention. For example, here, we want to, let's say, style an element based on this on the sidebar collapsible state. So the following will hide the sidebar group, one of the groups inside of our content, when the sidebar is in icon mode. So group data collapsible. So all of these state changes actually sets attributes, data attributes on our components, whether it's the group, which is wrapping the entire sidebar, or if there is like peer components to each other, you can target them with this Tailwind utilities. So here we are saying if the group, which is our sidebar, has a data attribute, data collapsible set to icon, hide this content group. Another example would be if a peer, which is a sibling of this menu action, so we're looking to see if the menu button is in active state, so this is a peer of that, and they already come with this peer namings inside of Tailwind. If you're not familiar with these classes or how to use this, there is this Twitter thread from shadcn in the documentation where he explains about 10 cool ways to use data attributes and states, interweaving JavaScript and Tailwind data attributes together to use for styling. For example, here we have a state here, and we are passing the state we are toggling the state by this sidebar trigger, and we are using CSS variables and setting those depending on whether or not this is state. So depending on the state, we are changing the width of the sidebar. So you can use a lot of these data attributes that are set on your sidebar components to style them using these selectors from Tailwind. Again, there is this Twitter thread linked inside of the documentation, where you can find cool tricks on how to use these different data attributes for styling your components, whether it's the group that's wrapped or has a data attribute, or a peer component that has a specific state. I found this very useful, not necessarily just to use them in sidebars, but generally using these concepts in any application for styling using Tailwind CSS. So that's a wrap for this video, folks. We built this dashboard component together using the sidebar menu. And we have this Next.js template where we share a regular layout between different pages of our site. And then we have this dashboard pages, which they share the dashboard layout using the shadcn sidebar menu. If you have any questions, like always, hit me up down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.